This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
There is a tempest blowing in Lakshadweep, India's smallest union territory. Its citizens are protesting against the government's new norms that are allegedly eroding their culture, lifestyle, economy, and biodiversity. The archipelago of 36 islands refuses to be decked up as a tourist hub and adhere to the guidelines of the government. They say that if their pleas are not heard, the storm may wreak havoc. I'm Devina Sengupta and you're listening to the Morning Brief. Before we delve into why the pristine blue waters of these coral islands are churning, let us understand the changes that the government wants to bring in.
The proposals include a ban on beef, a ban on non-vegetarian food in schools, disqualification of people with more than 2 children from contesting panchayat polls, introduction of Anti-Gunda Act in the island where the crime rate is very low, allowing sale of alcohol at resorts in populated islands, and establishment of an authority with powers to acquire land for development purposes.
To go deeper, I spoke to M. Rajshekhar, an independent journalist and a former colleague who has been tracking the crisis at Lakshadweep. Good morning, Rajshekhar, and thank you for being with us on the Morning Brief.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
The main tussle started when the government came up with Lakshadweep Development Authority Regulation 2021. When this was announced, it became like a massive tussle between people who are living in Lakshadweep and the government of India. The government says it will change the lives of those living there. How?
I don't actually think the tussle started because of this one particular draft act. Okay. I think all of this boiled over and came into the public's attention, 10 days ago. By that time, the people of Lakshadweep had been protesting for about at least 3 weeks by then. There were like some little activity on Twitter, people expressing worry, disaffection, the rest of it. I went to Lakshadweep about 7 years ago. Okay. And it's this very, very tiny, relatively traditional Muslim community. 97% of the people there are Muslims, right? And they have always been very apprehensive that Lakshadweep, given its lagoons and corals and everything, might go the Goa way in case tourism is allowed to come in a very unfettered manner. And therefore, they have sort of insisted on prohibition, for example. So once the new administrator came in and began taking a set of measures that the locals found inexplicable, it started with demolition of fishermen sheds. It was followed by a very unilateral decision to widen a road. It was followed by this announcement of banning beef, the introduction of liquor permits. And then you had this particular act coming through. What is going on? Well, I think 2 things are going on. The first is this very straightforward, I suppose, imagination from the Niti Aayog saying that, if Maldives can be a multi-billion tourism enterprise, so can Lakshadweep. It's a fairly simplistic sort of a thing. They have corals, we have corals, they have resorts, we don't have resorts, we should have resorts.
Why not Lakshadweep become Maldives of India? It is considered as corals paradise of India. We want to develop that. Yes, peace is essential. We have to maintain. Now also it is peaceful. Whatever we plan, this is for the welfare of the local residents, for the development of Lakshadweep.
That was Collector S. Askar Ali, chalking out the government's vision for Lakshadweep. But many, like Rajshekhar, disagree with him.
The other thing that is happening is that I think we must also look at the personality of the administrator in all this. Because everything he's doing is not really geared towards boosting economic activity or tourism on the islands. There are some other things he's doing.
The administrator Rajshekhar is talking about is Praful Khoda Patel, a former Gujarat BJP leader who within 6 months of taking charge has brought in sweeping changes in Lakshadweep through new draft bills. He introduced the draft Lakshadweep Animal Preservation Regulation 2021, which bans beef. And mind you, most of Lakshadweep's population is Muslim. Then there is the Draft Prevention of Antisocial Activities Regulation 2021, which allows the administrator to unilaterally detain people for up to a year. And finally, the draft Lakshadweep Development Authority Regulation 2021, which empowers taking away any piece of land on the island, irrespective of its ownership for development purposes. Patel is also the administrator of Dadra and Nagar Haveli and Daman and Diu. Rajshekhar, you were mentioning this interesting example of Diu as well. And even in your article in The Wire, you have mentioned how similar changes were brought about in Diu. And now we are seeing this replicated in Lakshadweep. How is the handling of the Diu Islands off the coast of Gujarat similar to handling of Lakshadweep off the coast of Kerala?
Well, let's see. In no particular order, these are some of the changes that played out in Diu. One, after coming in, he picked up all the pending construction projects and began pushing them aggressively. B, he insisted on starting a bunch of new construction activities which weren't really needed, like a 4-lane road in an area where there was actually very little traffic. There were demolitions, ostensibly to beautify the beachfront, etc., but that resulted in the loss of local livelihoods. There was a hijacking of responsibilities from local MPs, local MLAs, Zilla Parishads and Panchayats. I mean, all of us talk about economic development. I suppose the bigger frame here is that economic development is not only a rational process. In reality, it is exceptionally subjective.
I was reading as to how they have plans of desalination, bring in fresh water, have resorts that requires a lot of desalination. That is going to completely ruin the biodiversity balance out there. And at the same time, interestingly, to make a Maldives out of Lakshadweep is also very difficult because there are only so many months of the year when tourism will be on. For the rest of the months, there is no tourism because of the monsoons, because of the climate. What happens to the economic development then? How are the people going to earn if you convert everything into a tourist spot?
Okay, so let me just rephrase that question slightly. Let's take it purely on economic merit. A desalination plant need not necessarily ruin local biodiversity. Okay? It depends on where are you discharging the waste brine. Right? If you discharge it into the lagoon, it might damage the lagoon. If you discharge it outside, it might not. The bigger question is that if it costs you 16 crores to set up a desalination unit that can produce, let's say, 1 lakh liters of water a day, right?
Right.
2 questions emerge from there. One, so that 16 crores is what you're adding to your cost of operations, right? That's your fixed cost, plus the regular O&M costs. On top of it, you're talking about such a small archipelago that all the material for setting up your resort has to necessarily be shipped in from the mainland, which means that your cost of setting up a resort is going to be higher than the cost of setting up a resort on the mainland.
Yes.
Plus, your running costs are greater because you've got desalination. You've also got to invest in your own solar panel architecture.
Yes.
Right? What we are not clear about is that once you add all these costs, right, at the resort level, the inflated cost of construction, the cost of maintaining such a resort, because staff need not always be local. You will also need some staff coming in from the mainland. Nobody is going to leave their home in Kerala or Karnataka and come to Lakshadweep unless they're being paid more than what they would get back home, right? So you're talking about an economic enterprise with a slightly inflated pricing structure. The question then is that what is a viable room tariff for a resort in Lakshadweep? Because that number needs to be comparative vis-a-vis a Maldives.
Right.
The reefs of Lakshadweep are slightly decaying right now because of climate change.
Yes.
So if you're telling me that, I can go to Lakshadweep, to Maldives and get a room for say 10,000 rupees a night. If Lakshadweep is about 10,000 rupees a night, where would I go if I'm an international tourist or even an Indian tourist?
When the government put out tenders for Andaman or Lakshadweep in the past, what has been the response?
Every time we have put out these tenders for Andamans and Lakshadweep in the past, we've not had very, very good response. So what I think is likely to happen is that this will go the way of much of India's infrastructure sector, where a lot of hype is created. But the foundations for making this boom come about don't really exist. We're talking only about the cost structure for a resort. But if you really want tourists to come in large numbers, you also need to expand your port facilities. You need to expand your airport facilities. At this time, the runway in Lakshadweep can only handle a turboprop.
Okay.
In which case, then the question is that is Lakshadweep then going to spend this 1,000 crores or whatever upgrading its infrastructure? And will the resultant boom in tourism traffic be higher than the 1,000 crores? A, if not, this money could have been well spent elsewhere. B, if they do spend this 1,000 crores beefing up infrastructure and setting up these resorts, we can also be sure that unless this is done very carefully and sensitively, this is going to damage the local ecology, in which case the reefs are going to suffer and a resort will need 15 years to recover its investments, right? Are we sure that reefs will be healthy for 15 years to come if there is unplanned construction?
Most of the residents of Lakshadweep have been fishermen.
Yeah.
This is not the first time that the governments have been trying to bring in some amount of economic development out there. What is a viable plan where they get an economic opportunity, but at the same time, you see or you estimate not this kind of resistance? Because you cannot have a livelihood out of being fishermen down the centuries, given the economic situation, given the ecological disaster that is about to happen.
I don't know about that. Well, first of all, why did India create union territories? UTs were created because these were places with very unique cultures. And so we did not want to subsume them into a larger state because that identity and culture might be lost. What sets India apart really is this, right? That it's a mix of big and small cultures and societies. So when we sort of do this homogenization sort of a project, there's a danger of losing the social and economic structure of this one community in Lakshadweep.
To understand how threatened those associated with the island feel regarding their loss of identity, I spoke to Dr. Ayshabi Kalpeni. Today, a chief medical officer at the Life Care Hospital in Malappuram, Kerala, Ayshabi was born and raised in the Kalpeni Islands of Lakshadweep. I was pleasantly surprised when she decided to talk to me, since not many were willing to come on record, fearing repercussions. She spoke on the loss of local jobs, discussed the impact of the new draft laws, and how the Union Territory is seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases. Doctor, you have been brought up in Lakshadweep, right?
Yes.
And how was it growing up for you in the islands?
It was great pleasure, and I feel very proud to be born there and brought up there. Till 10th standard, I was there itself for 15 years of my life. Obviously, it was very difficult, like ships used to be once in a month or so, like things from mainland will arrive only once in a month. The food grains will reach us only once in a year or so. About education, so many teachers from mainland used to be there, and the quality education was very good.
So it was a very ideal kind of childhood, what we read about in books, it's a beautiful island and education is there. So everybody has access to education. Tell me now, doctor, right now, what the government of India is saying is we are bringing in economic development. We will build resorts in Lakshadweep. We will bring in tourists in Lakshadweep, like how we see in Maldives. Isn't that good for the islands?
The tourists yes, are already there, but we don't want tourists demolishing our islands, our houses, our trees, and our buildings, our assets, and broadening the roads and cutting down our trees. We don't want that. They have already started. They have already brought in the regulations with the town planning for tourists.
Right. So how is that going to impact your islands? How will that impact Lakshadweep, this kind of town planning that the government proposes?
Yeah, they are going to grab our land without any notice. And they are going to cut down the trees. They are going to broaden the roads. By that way, they are going to demolish our properties. And they have already brought in liquor, and they have banned beef. All these they say it's for tourists, for development, but we don't agree with that. This is not development. And they have already removed so many casual, almost thousands of casual workers and temporary workers from the other posts. Now they are unemployed. So how come this is development? This is not development.
So when you say casual workers, you basically mean the local workers, right?
Daily wages.
The daily wage laborers. So when you remove the daily wage workers, who is working in their place?
Nobody is working. 38 Anganwadis are closed. So nobody is working in the Anganwadis. They are just closed buildings. And the employees are sitting at home.
Why have the Anganwadis been closed? They have nothing to do with tourism, right? So why have they been closed?
They are saying that it's not needed. So education is not needed. And so many schools are getting closed also.
You are very vocal about the rights of people of Lakshadweep. And have you or other groups gone and held discussion with the government?
Not me. So many representatives have gone and met advisor to the administrator. Usually the new administrator is not available all the time. He comes for a short visits and then leaves the islands. And he never gives appointment to the local people and the representatives. And these people have gone and met the advisor and given him petitions. Also, like all of us have submitted our opinions. Like we have said that we are not happy with these sort of new regulations and the reasons for it also, but they have accepted it. But when these local people went to meet advisor to the administrator, he promised them that things will be okay, like whatever your concerns will be met, but only in verbal. They asked him to give everything in written, but he did not give anything in written.
Okay, so there has not been any draft, nothing written, nothing on paper. It's all verbal assurances. Tell me something.
Yeah.
Right now, when you have economic development on the charter, I understand most of the people working in Lakshadweep are in the fishing industry. How do you propose to bring in economic development in a group of islands if you don't increase the tourist influx? What are the other options you all suggest?
Do you know that Lakshadweep has no tourism potential beyond what is already developed under sports? That means whatever is there now, beyond that, there is no scope for tourism. The comparison with Maldives is superficial. Okay, Maldives as a separate country has no choice. But the economy of Lakshadweep is intimately linked to the mainland. For instance, hundreds of islanders from Midikoi, Agatti are sailors and they get employed from Calcutta. Okay, so Lakshadweep odds about 50,000 square kilometers of economic zone to the country, 50,000. Its potential, except for small-scale fishing, is largely unexploited now. We all know that economically the seas are the future. If at all a development should be set up, it should be Lakshadweep Sea Development Authority. Another thing is that these days everyone is working at home. If IT and internet is encouraged, so many educated people in Lakshadweep can work from home and it will be welcomed by the youth. Right now, they are removing all the temporary staffs from their posts. Okay. Is another thing, the latest they have brought is even among permanent staff, they want to find out who are all efficient enough and who are all not efficient. Those who are not efficient, they want to remove them from the permanent post. So when you are talking about tourism, how can you be so sure that the Lakshadweep people will be employed under tourism? How can you be so sure that this government, especially under this administrator, will give us jobs our educated young people qualified for?
Right, there are many unanswered questions out there. Lakshadweep was so far insulated from COVID cases, but with the influx of tourism, COVID has taken a leap out there, unfortunately. What have you been seeing?
Praful Patel, the new administrator, who is not an IAS or IPS, he is just a politician, and he joined on 5th December 2020. Before that, we had 0 cases. It was green zone. And as soon as he joined, he removed our protocol, and he said that there is no need of that protocol.
The protocol for those entering the islands was a 14-day quarantine period, 7 of which were to be spent in Kochi. However, a change in SOP that waived the quarantine period and now only requires travelers to present a negative RT-PCR test. This has led to an exponential rise in COVID cases in the island territory.
Okay, then after that, the surge of cases. Right now, there are about 7,000 cases and 28 deaths. And we don't have any proper infrastructure in our health sector. So what happens is that most of the critical cases, either they are dying or they are shifted to Cochin by airlifting. And by the time they reach Cochin, the crucial time is lost and most of them die. Unfortunately, most of them die.
If the government doesn't buckle down, if the government continues to implement its stance, what is going to be the result? Do you see a lot of unrest happening?
Obviously, there will be unrest happening. And already the collector in his press conference some 3 days ago said that, there was a Sri Lankan ship which had AK-47 and some 300 kilo of heroin. So he some 90 nautical miles away from Lakshadweep. Our limit is 20 nautical miles. Beyond 90 nautical miles, there was a ship with all this. And he was saying that because of this, he brought in PASA. Understand? So anything can happen in the international sea route. How come we the people of Lakshadweep is blamed for that?
If you see drug trafficking, it is increasing in and around Lakshadweep. Many youths are involved in drug trafficking and drug abuse. So when we want to develop these islands holistically, we cannot compromise on the law and order front. But in many cases, our local residents are involved in drug trafficking.
And while Collector Ali spoke on safety of the islanders, I wanted to learn if we know enough about the fragile ecosystems in our country before attempting to bring in generic changes. Can the idea of development be copy-pasted from, let's say, a Maldives to Lakshadweep? Kanchi Kohli, legal researcher, Center for Policy Research, a think tank, said a clear no. Kanchi, wanted to understand from you what makes islands like Lakshadweep, Andaman fragile, and how is climate change further eroding them?
I think first we need to really acknowledge and be humble about the fact that we know very little about island ecosystems. Whatever we know, we've learned through a period of time, and there is a lot of local knowledge about these islands. So we still know very little. These are very unique ecosystems, and islands have been always vulnerable to disasters, climate-induced events. I mean, the tsunami is not very far. Didn't happen very far back. Cyclones are almost like an annual occurrence. So islands are extremely vulnerable to these climate events. Alongside, I think over a period of time, marine biologists, researchers, scientists have also really pointed out that islands have been vulnerable to impacts of sea warming, sea erosion. For Lakshadweep and the Andaman group of islands, Andaman and Nicobar group of islands, issues like impacts on coral reefs, water stress, all these are very, very critical problems that we need to recognize. And climate change is only increasing the vulnerability of island ecosystems much more.
So when we know so little about them, and on top of that, we want to bring in drastic projects in a very short period of time in an already fragile ecosystem, where do we go wrong?
See, I think I think we have to first, as I said, we first acknowledge that we know little. Yet, I think we proposal after proposal go with a certain pattern. The pattern is that you first establish an urgency. You establish an urgency, and you establish a justification that what is happening in these spaces is not productive enough. It's not economically viable enough. We need to actually build over, dredge over these spaces. So the usual pattern is there will be a high-level committee that sets the agenda, timeframes, establishes the urgency and justifications. Following that, what happens is there is very little space for discussions, and there's very little space for even regulatory precautions to kick in these instances, because the timeframes, the logics and justifications through a Niti Aayog related document is already set in place. And whatever little regulatory precautions that we have are either weakened further to work with the agenda, or they have to fall in line with justification saying that this is projects of national interest and those kinds of things. So because you've actually set the grounds for massive land use change in an area which is otherwise working in a very different way. There are local livelihoods, there are ecosystem based highly productive livelihoods and occupations that are functional there.
For centuries, the islands have managed to develop themselves and at the same time maintain a diversity. What can be done to ensure more economic development in these islands? The dependency on the natural resources is diminishing. So what can be done to ensure economic development without causing severe harm? Or without causing harm, actually?
This question of yours can actually have a very technocratic answer, where one can very clearly say that there are long-standing recommendations that we should not move. At a policy level, we need to have ecological assessments. Policies need to be put out. They need to be debated. Developed more democratically. All those are good practices for governance. But I think at a larger level, what we really need to understand is that we need to not treat islands and coastal ecosystems, or any other space for that matter, as empty spaces. We need to rethink coastal development. We can't go with the idea that building tourism projects or port-led development or transshipment ports and airports is the best option for every space. You don't necessarily need to create Maldives out of Lakshadweep or Singapore and Hong Kong out of the Andaman Islands.
What is your biggest fear? Are you afraid that we are going to lose Lakshadweep?
I think it's the unilateral approach and in a very predetermined conviction that through which the Niti Aayog proposal is being implemented. Actually, one of the biggest problems with that is it leaves very little space for debate, dialogue, or appealing to the government even to change some things. So it's going with a mindset that all of which that exists in Lakshadweep today has to change. A good development agenda for Lakshadweep is high-end tourism. It is port-led development. It has very little space for local fishing livelihoods. It has very little space for the coral reefs or the lagoons in the area, and it fits in only not from their ecological value, only from its tourism potential. If we are talking about developing the islands, that the idea of their development needs to go through a process of designing, and that process of designing has actually happened far away from the islands, and that's why you have regulations and laws of unilateral, very dictatorial sort of policy interventions that are going into the place, where everything else there will be very little space for democracy.
And it is not like the mainland has not heard their pleas. Lakshadweep is closely associated with Kerala in terms of distance and cultural affinity. Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan highlighted that the islanders' way of living is being threatened, and those implementing the changes should rethink.
Pinarayi Vijayan has presented a resolution in connection with the ongoing unrest in Lakshadweep. He submitted this resolution in the Kerala Legislative Assembly. Pinarayi Vijayan has said that people are raising concerns and that there are attempts to encroach upon the cultural and specific features of Lakshadweep. Pinarayi Vijayan demanded a resolution to the concerns of the people of this island.
Thank you, Rajshekhar, Kanchi, Ayshabi, for chalking out the economic, cultural, and biodiverse impact on the fragile lands like Lakshadweep if we swoop in with changes without considering the local sentiments. We cannot hope to erase the divisions between the mainlanders and the islanders if we do not put ourselves in their shoes. I'm Devina Sengupta, and you've been listening to The Morning Brief. This episode was edited by Anjali Venugopalan and coordinated by Bhavya Dilip Kumar. I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode. Do send in your feedback to themorningbrief@timesgroup.com and share the episode on your social media networks. The Morning Brief airs every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you for listening and have a nice day ahead. All clips used in this podcast belong to their respective owners. You can find the credits in the description.